In this video, we'll be talking about achievement targets and assessment methods and how to best use these to understand your students' learning. To begin, I'll be talking about achievement targets. Achievement targets allow educators to focus their teaching and assessment more easily and accurately. By using different achievement target types, teachers can incorporate different types and levels of learning and understanding into their education and assessment. So we have several different types of achievement targets on the right here in this chart, including knowledge/understanding, reasoning, skills, products, and dispositions. And each of these has a different way of addressing learning and later on assessment types. For example, knowledge and understanding involves being able to know certain facts or concepts and reiterate them later on, possibly with the use of a reference material. Reasoning involves thinking proficiencies, using one's knowledge to solve a problem, make a decision, etc. Skills, being able to do behavioral demonstrations or doing what is important, using one's knowledge and reasoning to perform skillfully. Products involves being able to create a product based on all the learning that has been accomplished in a certain unit, whereas dispositions, is about development of feelings within attitudes, interests, and motivational, particularly pertaining to the content material. Now, each of these target types lines up with certain content standard or benchmark keywords. For example, knowledge or understanding is usually lined up with explain, understand, describe, where something like skills might be aligned with observe, focus attention, listen, perform, do, etc. By using different target types within a certain content field, teachers can vary educational experiences and assessments for their students. With that in mind, let's talk about different assessment types. So different forms of assessment can be used to analyze different types of learning or even different aspects of the same learning. So for example, within one topic, a teacher could use two different assessment types to analyze two different aspects of that same unit. Within assessment types, there's typically four general types. The first being selected response, which students select the best response from a set of options. Common examples of selected response include multiple choice, true-false, matching, fill in the blank, etc. This type of assessment is most often used for objective assessment, where there is one correct answer and it is a typically all or nothing type question, where it's either you get it correct or you get it wrong. The next type of assessment is written response, where students construct a written answer to a question or task. Written response can be further broken down into two different types, being short answer or extended response. Short answer typically being 1 to 2 sentences, where extended response would be something like a paragraph or longer. Written response can either be in an objective form, where it requires students to use a written response to answer a question with one specific answer, such as explaining a scientific phenomenon, or it could come in a subjective form, where students have a little more leeway in the correct answer and it's more up to interpretation, such as a book reflection. The next type of assessment would be performance assessment, where students conduct a presentation or performance to demonstrate their mastery of an exercise. Common examples of this include speaking in a foreign language, playing a musical instrument, or writing a lab report. These are often summative assessments that are designed to display the long-term development of a skill over the duration of a course or a unit. And finally, the last type of assessment would be personal communication, where teachers conduct both structured and unstructured interactions with students to find out what they have learned. A large portion of this assessment type occurs during the learning process itself, with students and teachers interacting through questions and explanations. More formal examples of personal communication could include oral exams or written journals. This type of assessment is very important to teachers because it can be used to understand each student as an individual and help tailor their education. So with achievement targets and assessment types in mind, how do we go about planning a full classroom assessment to the best of our abilities? Well, one way to do that is using the assessment development cycle. So the overall goal of any assessment is to accurately measure student achievement. This cycle is designed to help instructors ensure that they reach that goal. Through practice and professional development, instructors can learn to master this development cycle and achieve what is called assessment literacy, or the ability to use assessment to the best possible abilities and most effectively. So, the assessment development cycle is broken down into 3 stages with a total of 8 steps. The first stage being the planning stage. And step 1 begins with determining users and uses. So every assessment is designed to provide information for a certain group of people, called the users. Depending on the user and their role in the classroom, they can have different uses for the same assessment. Excuse me. For example, a teacher can use a quiz to assess students' current understanding and identify deficiencies that need to be addressed, while a student could use the same quiz to set expectations for an upcoming exam and identify areas where they personally need to develop. This would be an example of 2 different types of users having different uses for the same assessment. Determining this type of information from the beginning helps to limit the scope of potential assessment types. Moving on from step 1, we go to step 2, which is specify the intended learning target. So in this step, the teacher needs to identify which learning or achievement targets, like we talked before about, will be addressed by this assessment. This helps to determine how much instruction time this topic will need, as well as how detailed the resulting assessment will be. For example, if the appropriate achievement type is knowledge or understanding, it may not require as much instruction time as something like skill-based, where you have to demonstrate and show students how to develop those skills over a longer time than you do with something more simple like knowledge or understanding. With an intended learning target or achievement target in mind, we can move on to step 3, which is selecting the appropriate assessment method. So, one way to do this would be use a chart such as this one, where different assessment methods are shown in one axis, and another axis shows the different achievement targets. So each assessment method is naturally compatible with certain achievement targets while not aligning well with others. So a chart like this shows which ones match up well while which ones are not a good match. So for example, selective response would be a very good match for knowledge mastery because it's a way of quickly and easily determining do students know certain facts or concepts. While selective response would be poor for skills or products type achievement targets because they do not sufficiently show whether or not a student has mastered one of those achievement targets. Another example could be how performance assessment would be poor for knowledge mastery because it could be very time consuming to have students perform so many things to show a large set of fact knowledge, whereas performance assessment would be very good for a skill type achievement target because it's a great way of showing the students have mastered a skill through performance. So using a chart like this, an appropriate assessment type can be chosen based on the chosen achievement target that we chose in step 2. So going back to our different steps, we have now completed steps 1 through 3. Step 4, we need to determine the appropriate sample size. So one challenge of assessment is collecting enough relevant information to properly determine each student's achievement level without spending too much classroom time on assessment, because this takes away from instruction time. One way to optimize this is by analyzing how much information needs to be collected and planning accordingly so that the assessment is thorough without being superfluous. This step can be difficult at first, but over time can be enhanced with practice and experience as you learn how much information is enough information. So with the conclusion of step 4, we conclude our planning stage and move on to the development stage. And we begin with step 5. So now that the appropriate assessment type has been selected, the next step is to develop some set of exercise or task for our assessment as well as a scoring instrument. This means that we need to look at the options within our selected assessment type and select the most appropriate way of conducting the assessment. The scoring instrument is a very important aspect of the assessment overall because it sets the expectations for what achievement looks like within the assessment and gives students a guide to how to successfully perform that assessment. This can manifest itself as something like a key for a multiple choice exam, a rubric for a group project, etc. Once the assessment is fully developed, it needs to be double-checked to ensure that it is fair, unbiased, and complete in step 6. During this step, a teacher could even seek review or advice from their peers to help evaluate different aspects that they may not have originally seen and may have missed. So step 6 is all about making sure the assessment is as fair and complete as possible before administering it. With the conclusion of step 6, we finish up the developmental stage and move into the use stage, beginning with step 7, which is to administer and score the test. This part is pretty straightforward. You have developed the test and it is now time to give it to the students and then score it. And after that, we move on to step 8, where the instructor should take time to analyze the results as well as reflect on the efficacy of the assessment. So during this step, instructors should look at the results and ask themselves certain questions, such as, what do the results mean? Did students perform well? Did they perform poorly? Do the students' achievements reflect successful instruction, or do you need to go back and address certain deficiencies? Were there common mistakes that most students made, and that means maybe it needs to be explained again? Do the students was the assessment successful in evaluating the targets and standards you were looking to evaluate? Was it a well-developed assessment? Do you need to give further assessment to fully ensure that learning has been completed and that the students are ready to move on? Or could this assessment be repeated in the future for a similar unit to make sure students have successfully learned that topic? And with that, that concludes my video about assessment and achievement targets. Thank you very much.